Diane. I met Diane fairly recently in a group that we're both a part of. And I love her positive attitude. I love what she wants to bring to people, and how she's very in tune with how people deal with topics such as fear and our stories and what we tell ourselves, and how what we tell ourselves shapes the narrative in our head and our lives. And I think that's definitely worth spending a lot of time talking about and diving deep into it. So a little bit of background: Diane lives in New Hampshire. She's as close to the mountains and the sea when she isn't reading 4th century writings, which is pretty awesome. I think that's great. You can find her climbing the 4,000 footers or meandering the rocky coast. I can read a lot. I cannot climb a 4,000 footer. Cheers to you. Her favorite cities are Munich and Milan. Her favorite traveling companion is Kevin, her husband of 35 years. Their 5 children have settled back in New England, where they love gathering, cross-country skiing, hiking, and making great food together. It all sounds awesome. You can find Diane online at theinspiredroad.com, where she writes and coaches, and where she leads people to freedom, hope, and transformation. If you desire a trusted advisor on your journey, reach out to Diane at theinspiredroad.com, subscribe to her newsletter, or schedule a call, and certainly order her newest publication, Rejecting Fear: Learning to be Led by Love. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Diane, at this point.
Okay, great. So you want me to start with why I published the book, right? Is that a good place to start, or where do you want me to start?
Start. That led you to this idea and down this road?
What led me to the idea is really kind of living a beautiful life and moving into the business world a couple of years ago, and just realizing that I had a lot of fear underneath, kind of like a little bit of like, does the outside match the inside? So I'm really successful, but I found that I didn't have a lot of peace underneath all of my success. So right, raised 5 kids, did a lot of nonprofit work, ran teams, and coached and mentored people kind of on the side, like as a kind of a side hustle. But I really kind of came face to face with a lot of my fears when I actually started working in the world. So they were all bubbling underneath. I just wasn't aware of them. So I started a business a couple of years ago, coaching. And what led me to write the book is that my husband is a sales trainer. He owns his own business. And he said, Diane, you need to write a book. I said, I'm not writing a book. You need to write a book. You need to write a book. And he actually it was true. He was actually right, because I don't have a coaching degree. I don't have a business degree, but what I have is this deep intuition, but I didn't have any clout. I didn't have any credentials. And so what's really fascinating is I wrote the book out of my client stories and out of my own story. So I was coaching people for a couple of years, and I started to see a pattern where they would have these thoughts that didn't line up with what they wanted in their life. And then they told themselves a story that wasn't true. I could see it wasn't true, but they kept telling themselves the same story. And then that kind of uncovered all these self-limiting beliefs. And probably my most beautiful and poignant story is the client from chapter 3. I called it Walking with Wheelbarrows, but we ended up changing the title name to Engaging Your Emotions. And the reason we called it Walking with Wheelbarrows is because she came up with this beautiful story of not dealing with her grief by pushing it in a wheelbarrow. And she drew the illustration. And of course, I asked every client for their permission, but it isn't that when you're a coach, you want to write all your client stories down. That's not what it was. But what I realized is there was this very deep common thread of thoughts and stories, emotions that weren't dealt with, kind of reconciliations that needed to happen, and then the belief system and the power to change were all connected. And so I just kept uncovering it and uncovering it and uncovering. And then I pulled my own story into the book because I had an amazing editor. So I encourage you all to work with the flourishing editor, because you need a really good editor to see what you don't see. So I could see everything in other people's lives, but writing the book really caused me to see how much fear there was left in my own life, even up to publishing and launching and hitting sell on Amazon. All the fear was very real. So it was pretty amazing. So that's the backstory of the book. That makes sense.
And tell a little bit about going to Italy.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. Yep,
that was really a pivotal moment where, well, you go ahead, tell it. I just
Yeah,
think it's
so
amazing
3 years ago,
story.
before I started the book, I took a trip to Italy with a friend. It was just on a whim. A friend was getting married, and then I'd written a little retreat called the Field Guide to Life. So we were going to give this conference or retreat in Italy, and this whole story wasn't in the book, not in the first 7 drafts of the book. So that's what I mean by find a good editor, because she was able to see that I wasn't holding the whole story together with my own story. I wasn't holding the whole manuscript together. So anyway, I went to Italy, and it was a beautiful place. It was really fun. We went to the wedding. I went to a retreat by myself. It was really gorgeous. But obviously, I come from a childhood of trauma. So, what happens with trauma is a couple of things. Either you act out of it all your life, and it's just a mess, right? Like you have addictions and you have trauma and you have all kinds, and you just keep repeating patterns. Or what I did is I kind of closed a door on it all, locked the door, left home, and thought, oh, that's good. I'm glad I'm done with that. But when I went to Italy, what happened was I literally saw a country lane. I thought, oh gosh, that looks very familiar. Wow, looks just like home. And then all the fields. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's just like home. And then when I went in the backyard, there was this mulberry tree. And I just remember standing there going, you have got to be kidding me. Like, this is not fair. Like, I wanted to stomp my feet and, yell at some cosmic, person and say, this isn't fair. You can't do this. Because in trauma, what happens is you're standing in the moment in time, but an event, a smell, something you see, it throws you off your balance and you get thrown into the past. And so for me, seeing that mulberry tree just threw me back 40 years. Now I'm hiding as a child in this violent home. But I wasn't a child in a violent home. I was standing in a beautiful country home in Italy. So I just stood there in the moment and I thought, how is it possible to bring all that fear into a beautiful day in Italy? And I couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't call up the fear. I don't know how exactly I worded it in the book, but it was like a magic genie bottle. And if somebody said the wrong thing, the dark genie of fear comes out. I'm not safe. I'm not this. I'm not that. And because it's tethered so tightly in your heart, you just have never worked through it. And I've done the work. Like, I've been to counseling and I've forgiven people and I've done all that outside work, but I've never really kind of cleaned out the inside of all of that fear, because I really thought it was done. I just raised a beautiful family and I was a little overbearing and over controlling because I wanted to keep them safe. I can look back and say, oh, wow, that was intense. I probably wouldn't want to be my own child because I was so, careful and vigilant. Right? But I lived like a really good life. I lived a really, I have a great marriage. And so my point is just that we don't know what we don't know until something stands before us. Either we're deeply hurt. It doesn't have to be a deep trauma, right? Mine's trauma, but it can be a deep hurt. It can be a betrayal by a friend or a business partner. It can be just the everyday exhaustion of the fatigue of COVID and what's going on in the world. It could be worries about Ukraine. It creates this underlying anxiety. And if you can deal with the anxiety, that's great. But so I guess what happened in Italy, to answer your question, coming all the way around, is that I came face to face with these fears that I didn't know I still had. And then I was far enough along on the road of mental health and a great grounded life that I realized, oh, I get to choose. I can choose whether I'm grounded in love or grounded in fear. And then that was true for me. And so I didn't even realize what happened when I wrote the book. And this is great for anybody who's a coach or a consultant who's writing. Go back into your journals if you journal, or go back into the memories and sit. What was it in that pivotal moment that really precipitated a change. So I went back and reread those journals, and I was shocked because I didn't remember having that aha moment until I read about it again. And I wrote the whole thing down like it was a conversation, right? And so it was really beautiful. So the reason that's so important in the book is because I didn't think it was important. So I thought I can just tell client stories and I can just do this thing. But what happens is if you're a coach or a consultant or you're working with people, the more authentic and vulnerable you can be, I feel like the more credibility it gives you. So I'm not just saying, oh, let go of your fear. Oh, do this, think positive. It isn't that. It's that I've had to work for it. And I've come from this place and moved to here. But it isn't just about trauma. It isn't just about, significant childhood losses. It's also about your husband leaving you, or one of your children dying, or a business partner betraying you. Like any kind of loss or betrayal or hurt can really create a foundation of fear. You're afraid to go out. I mean, I have friends now who are still afraid to leave their houses, right? They're just afraid. And so we have this fear running, and who isn't afraid of the stock market? And like, there's just so many things in the world right now. You could look and say, oh, there's something that's grounded in fear, and Ukraine is grounded in fear, and Russia is grounded in fear. And we still have to choose in my daily life. I can't bear all that. I just can't bear it. I'm one human frail being. So if I can ground myself in love, I can bring some hope to the world. I can bring some peace. And I can also live a little bit more like a stable person. If that makes any sense.
I find these days that there's a conscious effort out there by certain parties to create fear in us, whether that fear drives a consumerism or that fear ties into how we practice our right to vote, how we engage with who we engage with, all of those things. So it can, I think, really rule us in ways. And I love in the book that one of the first things that you talk about is calling out the thoughts, right? Being really in tune with those fearful and negative thoughts that are coming to us. And then you have very practical ways to deal with that, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we put up our next poll, because it does directly address the topic of fear. And it asks you to choose some motivation, to identify which of the choices you fear most. And I know which one I would choose. And some people who know me think that, no, you're so confident. I don't think that would be you. I don't see that. But yeah, it is. So we got our first answer here. Yes, loss of a loved one. While they're taking the poll, you want to talk a little bit more about calling out your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that happened to me when in the process of publishing the book, I got all the way to, hit, publish on Amazon, like save and submit, your manuscript. At least I published through Amazon. So that's where that was. And for a whole 4 or 5 days, I was literally just frozen in fear. And finally, one day I said to myself, okay, what are you thinking? And I was thinking the most ridiculous things like, whatever, I made a mistake. I should have never told my story. What are people going to think of me? And I kept like following the thought. And that's the whole point, is you can have a thought. Thought actually might be true. Like, what are people going to think of me? It's a good thought. It's a good question, but then you have to dig deeper. Like, just thinking that thought, where does it take me? Right. So maybe people think that was a stupid book to write. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you have to, it sounds silly, but you have to almost tease out your thoughts so that you can find out that all of them are leading you to be paralyzed and anxious and worried. And so it was very funny because I realized the book was already published. Like it did not, none of my thoughts really actually mattered in the light of day. I could keep thinking them and get myself more and more anxious and worried, or I could just say, well, isn't this interesting? And that's what I did. One day I had my conversation with myself and I thought, isn't this interesting? I'm really worried. And I had just stopped right there instead of continuing to be worried about the book and what people would say. And if I would lose friends or gain friends or lose clients or gain clients, I just said, isn't this interesting? I'm so worried. And then of course, if you're really self-aware, you can go, what am I worried about? And then you can actually let go of the worry, right? So in the guide to the book, I kind of teased that out, the idea that you actually need to just sit down and write down your thoughts and write down your fears and your feelings and your thoughts so that you can get them outside of yourself. You can give them a voice and look them in the mirror kind of thing. So it's kind of helpful.
You're looking at, I like how, the idea when that thought comes up, not having judgment, but just recognition about, wow, yeah, that's a thought. That's an interesting thought. What do I do with that? Where did that come from? How is that serving me in any way? And, I can choose to replace it with a different thought, or just be aware that it's something I'm working on, So let's end our poll here, see where we are. So what are we afraid of? We can see some of the responses here. The one that I'm probably most afraid of, nobody chose, and that's public humiliation, right? That kind of ties in with like that's kind of what authors go through, right? When they put that book out there, it's out there. What are people going to think about it? I've had to wrestle with that, even doing something like this being our debut book blossom event. I had a lot of fear around it because, what if it doesn't go well? If I make a fool, my big thing is, what if I make a fool out of myself? And then over the years, I have learned that I can recognize that thought. I can go, yeah, that's there, but let me look back at how I've dealt with things in the past, the times when I have been nervous and it's been okay, the times when I've made a mistake and people still love me. I can go back and examine that, and that does help me process it and get through it and not, shy away from the things that I want to do, right? The projects I want to have a hand in. So thank you everyone for sharing about the fears that you have. I think the one that was the biggest response here is loss of a loved one, right? That's huge. I lost my mom, my oldest brother passed quite a few years ago, and then my father, and a few years ago I lost my mother. And that sudden sense of, I have a very small, I don't have a large extended family other than the one I married into, but it gripped me for a while, but I got through it. But I allowed myself, and you talk about this in the book, allowing yourself to feel those emotions. And you talk about expressive writing and how that can help. Can you take more into that?
Yeah. And in the 1980s, it was really interesting. James Pennebaker out of Austin, Texas, was a professor. And he took a group of college students and said, hey, sit in this room for 15 minutes for 4 days in a row and just write about your most traumatic emotional event. Now, I don't even know if that's legal anymore. Like, I'm not sure that's the wisest thing to do.
And I'll publish it online and we'll all talk about it. No.
Well, that's probably what would happen now. But the crazy thing is that these kids, I would call them kids, 18, 19, 20, wrote about their most traumatic experience or emotional upheaval, and they felt better. Their health was better, their blood pressure was better. And so it became a tool in psychology, expressive writing. And what it does, as much as I've researched, is that it allows your brain two things. One, to organize material differently. And number two, it allows closure. Your brain doesn't want to keep thinking about something over and over. So when we do this repetitive worrying, oh my gosh, I'm so worried about this. And, so we're going to Germany on Friday. So everything needs to be packed. And if I just make a list, I'm actually calmer because it's out of my brain. I've organized the material and I can quiet myself. And I think one of the tools that we're missing in our society, especially with social media, is we're always on and we're always processing, but we're not actually processing what's inside, and we're not actually processing to conclusion. So when you expressively write about your emotions, or your experiences, you allow your brain to bring closure. It's like closing a book. It's like finishing a book. I'm done with that chapter. And so my client with the wheelbarrows, she had never journaled in her life. And she said, I don't know what to write. I said, it's okay. Grab a cup of coffee. And we had a 10-week session we were doing together. I said, for 10 weeks, we're going to talk for an hour every week. And if you can't commit, let's not start. She was willing to commit. She was in so much emotional pain. And we went through her journals. And the first week, she had nothing. I have nothing to write. I said, that's okay. Second week, she couldn't get out of bed. She was so tired, but she started to write. And all that came out was, I'm so sad. And it was perfect. And then she started to be able, it's almost like the spigot turned on, let's just say, to her heart, right? So she'd always been, well, I feel sad, but I feel was coming from her head, not from her heart. So when you feel sadness, it's a feeling, it's a visceral response, right? There are tears, there's a kind of, your body closes in on itself. When you think you're sad, like, you know what I feel like doing today? Having a cup of coffee. Like, that's not a feeling. Like, I don't feel like having a cup of coffee. I want a cup of coffee, right? But we've mixed up all of our vocabulary. So when you do expressive writing, you give yourself permission to be and to feel and to work through things that we just naturally try to avoid, like grief or anger or betrayal.
And then that you write about this, how that can lead to really like understanding and questioning not only the narrative you've been telling yourself, your story, right? Because our brains are wired for story. And so we are always relating to that in some way, our own stories, other people's stories, and the beliefs that we create from the story that we've been telling ourselves about ourselves. You speak about healing those beliefs. And I thought it was interesting because it's healing versus changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's, I want to think more about that, but I think there's something to that wording that's very unique and special. And I also want to mention here and I want you to talk about that, but in our chat, Kenny Harper is with us, the amazing Kenny Harper, love you. And he writes, in my biggest struggle, I tried to play tough and plow through versus processing it and working through it. And I've since learned that is not the best approach. Wow. So yeah, I mean, people say you just get to the other side, you just, but don't feel it. Like you said, using journaling, expressive writing, something like that to get it out. Yeah, I think that can be often for many a much more beneficial way to try to get to the other side, letting ourselves feel it. Can you talk more about beliefs and healing?
Beliefs. So, I mean, I tell a really personal story. I had to ask my husband if I could tell the story at the beginning of chapter 4 about when we got married. So, we're dating, we had a really short engagement, I don't know, like 4 or 5 months. And we were both a little bit older, 24, 27. And underneath all of the, this is great, I'm so happy, I met the love of my life, I was terrified. But I didn't know. And my belief was I wasn't worthy to be married. I wasn't worthy to be loved, right? It's a very deep belief coming from a ton of trauma. And again, that's one piece of a belief system. So for me to heal that belief required me seeing it and examining it and going back and kind of reconciling the conversations that I had with people at the time, not necessarily even if they're alive, but I have to settle the accounts, right? I have to, C.S. Lewis has this beautiful thing. You have to go back and you can't right the wrong, but you can go back and you can take a new road, right? Like you probably have the quote right at the top of your fingers.
I marked it. I have it.
Why don't you read that, Kimberly? Because I'm kind of messing it up.
Let me find it. Keep talking to us, and it'll take. I have so many here.
So the idea is that my belief comes from an equation, from a story I tell myself in a situation where sometimes something wrong or something bad happened. And C.S. Lewis has a great quote about that.
He talks about, I'm not able to find it here.
Okay.
But think he talks about if you make an error in the sum of something, right? It's a sort of an analogy to math. You can't go back and fix it until you've gone back and examined it, right? To where you
Yeah.
found the error. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I have it right here. Give me 1 second. That's so funny. Oh, no, I don't. I have Tell Me Your Sorrows. Anyway, the whole idea is that you go back and you say, what was the error? And did I make the wrong sum? So I can't change what happened, but I can change what I assume, what I believe about myself from the situation that happened, right? And so for me, it was not worthy to be loved. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like I have
Client, for
10,000 little
another
stickies here.
client was another client of mine. It was I'm a failure because my marriage ended, right? So now you have like two extremes of marriage there, but in any case, she couldn't move forward to a beautiful, kind of wonderful life if she believed that she was a failure. Like you have to go back and you have to say what really happened, what's true about me, what's true about the other person, and how can I move forward, right? And so, and and he Lewis uses a beautiful term, dissevering power. You have to use dissevering power, and I had to look that up. And what it means is this: we keep perseverating on things, but we have to cut that tie with this power to shift, right? And so when I say heal beliefs, I'm actually looking at the emotion behind the belief. So a lot of times we do this: say 5 affirmations. I'm strong, I'm beautiful, I'm smart, I'm successful, I'm an amazing business person. But I don't believe any of that. And so, oh, thank you, Avery. The sum can be put right, but only by going back to find the error and working at a fresh curve. So I I have to heal my belief on an emotional level. That's what I mean by healing beliefs. I can think a new belief till the day I die. I can think a new belief for 100 days. I can think a new habit and practice a new habit for 21 days and it's supposed to change. But I can't think myself out of something that's in my heart that I haven't worked through. Right. So say you have a betrayal or something, right? And you walk away saying, I can never trust anyone again. I can't do this. I can't do that. That's a feeling. That's not just a thought. That's also a feeling. And I think so much of our culture is very head oriented. I'm just going to, like Kenny said, we're just going to power through this. And just got to get through this. I got to do a new thing. But actually, you just have to take a moment and breathe and just say, wow, this really hurts. It's sort of like PT for the heart, right? Like you don't just keep going. You have to stop and look at what's injured and then move forward. So healing beliefs is really looking at what we hold in our hearts. That's, I think, the point.
And also, that idea of pushing through, which I think I don't think it's necessarily just a real American idea, but here in America, we do hear it a lot, right? Um, it's very accomplishment driven, right? We will get over things and have a better life and have a better mental health if we just do. We just, we write the next book, we do the next podcast, we start the next business and we're successful at it. All of that has to be something that other people can see, an accomplishment we made. And I think that makes us, and this can be great things, right? This can be really uplifting things for us and other people, but it it can also cause us to miss and just totally not work on the interior, just severing of the power of the emotion and the fear. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Kenny's chiming in about, we look at it as a sign of weakness and we think, oh, my ego and I have to admit weakness, right? And that is, like you're saying, the world wants you to do something more. And if I just do more, then look at the outside. It's sort of like a really good frosting on an empty cake, right? And,
I like that.
right? Like the frosting is great, right? Like you can, how many, but I think there's a crash and burn mentality there. And I think the fuse gets really small. I don't know because I was never really good at that fake it till you make it thing. I just kind of played small. But I think underneath there must be this constant anxiety of I'll be found out, or the real truth will come out, or I don't know, because I don't live in that space of do. I kind of live in a little bit more of a oh, I can't do this weakness kind of side of it. So I think there are actually two ways. Like you can stay weak, right? Imposter syndrome. Yeah. You
Yeah,
can.
that's going to say, yeah, Angela wrote imposter syndrome, and it's exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah. And so I don't know myself in that way, right? Like I'm like, oh, I can't do that, but actually, you know what I mean? And other people are like, do, and they, it's underneath. Like, so, but once you clean up the inside, nobody's got anything on you. Do you know what I mean? Like you're living your own authentic life. And that's where I like to work with business owners and executives, because they're so keyed into do, but they're just running and gunning and they don't even know what's happening inside. And so when something like a failed business or a failed marriage or a failed relationship happens, they don't have the tools to go through it, right? So that's why I love bringing those two spaces together.
Your last chapter is on restoring your will.
Yes.
Can you speak about that and how to me, that that sounds like this enormous, impossible thing sometimes, especially when I'm, in a certain state that's not productive or not, not in the best mental state. How do we go about restoring our will, and what does that mean?
Yeah. And I think the fun thing is the illustration that I was kind of given about riding a bike. So my good friend's granddaughter said, Nana, I tell my bike where to go and it goes there. And the idea of the will, like willpower, the strength to do something, it's actually agency. So agency is that idea that I can make a change in the world. So if I wake up and I want to have coffee, I exert my will and I put on the coffee. I pour the grounds, I get the water, I boil. We have an old, kind of percolator thing, right? But I have to do something to get a change, right? That's a very simple thing, right? If I'm going to start a business, I have to go to the bank and open an account. And I have to, register with the state of New Hampshire. I have to do things to create something. So agency is the ability to create change, right? And what happens is we get super stuck in, well, this is my life. This is what I do. This is how I am and who I am. But I think sometimes what that is that our agency is not actually right, kind of centered in who we are. So for example, if I want to, and the easiest example is controlling your kids. So in one way, your will can be in someone else. Like I'm going to tell my 25-year-old, like I use it in the story in the book, my husband's going to tell my 25-year-old he can't go on a race on a rainy day. And our son was like, Dad, I'll wear a rain jacket. Like, it's not like, so it's not up to me to control someone else. So that's one thing we do with our will. We try to exert our will. I want you to behave. It's great when you have 6-year-olds, really not great for 26, horrible for 46, probably. I don't know yet. Right. So I want you is exerting your will over someone. So that's one way we kind of lose our will. And a lot of people kind of my age or older are really caught in a lot of sorrow and grief and anger because their children aren't behaving. Their adults aren't behaving as they want. So that I talk about that in the book, because people get really sucked into, you need to behave the way I want you to, or believe what I want. It just doesn't make any sense, right? If you really stop and think, I'm trying to get on my child's bicycle. Like, it's like they're not on a tricycle anymore. They don't have training wheels. They have their own bike. Right. But another place where our will gets stuck is if you've had any kind of trauma or deep loss. And what happens there is if you're powerless as a child, if a certain, like, so for me, it was kind of a chaotic childhood with a lot of different things going on. So I didn't know I was safe. And so I didn't bring that feeling of safety and a sense of belonging to myself and being able to. So for instance, if I wanted to do something as a child, I couldn't make it happen, right? I don't know how to explain it. Anybody who's had trauma would completely understand what I'm saying, but So that's one instance, right? So for me, I have to go back to my childhood and say, where did I feel powerless? And I have to go back and really reconcile that. Yes, people did awful things, but it was 40 years ago. I mean, I had one client and we did this, reconciling resentments. And she says, oh my gosh, I've been saying I've been a victim for 50 years for one incident that happened 50 years ago. So I was a victim 50 years ago, but I'm not a victim today, right? Or, I mean, I don't know, we might apply it to the, no, I'm not even going to go there. I'm trying to think of another situation. So say you have I know we can talk about a business situation, right, where you're working with a team of people. And this happened to me before, where I was with a team of people and we didn't agree. And I didn't have the power needed. I didn't have 51% control of the company, right? And maybe that's the best way to look at it. You always have 51% of the control of your business, your life, right? If you don't, you probably need to see a counselor, you need to see somebody, a coach, a mentor to work through that, because we have our bad days. We have the days like I did 4 days where I just sat, I wanted to just read a book, not my own. Like, I mean, I just wanted to hide from the world. Like we have those hiding days, right? But 51% of the time, and then ever growing, right? As we keep changing, it should be more and more. I'm stepping into my life. I'm not reacting. I'm not defensive. I'm just living free. And I think that's my passion in the world, is that I see so many people who are they're holding back because either they're held back by something in the past, or they're just holding back because they're afraid, or they want to play it small, when in fact the world needs everyone and all of their gifts. So that's my sweet spot, is finding people who just they have so many gifts and potential, but they're so busy using coping mechanisms and trying to not be afraid, that all the fear is keeping them from being who they can be. So the will is a tough thing because it's elusive. We don't have you know what I mean? But it's as simple as I choose not to have, 10 glasses of wine tonight. If I'm an alcoholic, I'm probably going to have 10 glasses of wine. I'm not an alcoholic. So that's what I mean by agency. If I don't have some hurt or sickness or wound that's bothering me, that's hindering me, I'm free to make the choice. That's what the will is. I'm free to choose. Today, do I want to work on my business, or do I want to drive to the coast and get an ice cream cone, which is in fact what I did.
I think also, I want to think in terms of agency, because we talk about that in storytelling too, even in like fiction storytelling. Do our characters have agency? Have we given them agency? And there's so much out there in the world that wants to strip that from us. Possibly, in different ways, and in ways that have to do with class, and ways that have to do with gender, with identity, with race, with whatever it is. And um, there's a ways in which we have to forge ahead and restore our will and practice agency in the face of that.
Yes.
Maybe not even in terms of there's fear involved, but there could be fear involved, but facing that, and possibly through community, right? And banding our agency together to drive a positive way forward, to heal some beliefs or some limiting thoughts that we may have about ourselves, and restore our will and find our agency in big ways and the small ways. Right. You talk about in the book too about compassion, self-compassion being a big part of that. That's something I struggle with. I can be very hard. I can be very achievement driven, very hard on myself. It comes from, things in my childhood and that perfectionism that I used to think was a good thing, and now I realize can be a paralyzing, not so good thing. And I have to not fear it, but face it. Can you talk a little bit about compassion? And then we're going to go into our final poll. And if anyone would like to have, I see a question has popped up. So if anyone has a question, it's a great time to be writing those down.
Yeah, I I think you cannot do this work without self-compassion. So if it's something you struggle with, you really do need to find a mentor or a coach or a guide or something, because all of this requires even I'm just going to say just adult wounds, but even just adult stress, worries, betrayals, whatever they are, we have to turn inward and have compassion, right? And if we can't do that, even compassion on how frail I feel or how weak I feel, I have to just every once in a while give myself 2 hours off to drive to the ocean and get an ice cream, because that's compassion. Like that's, I've been working hard and I've been pushing hard, and I need to show kindness to myself, because the world is a harsh place and there's a lot of evil in the world and there's a lot of hard things in the world and there's so many uncertainties. And it's almost, we lose the ability. We're so, if you have children, it's so easy to turn. Well, it was for me. It was so easy to turn and comfort my children. Like, oh, what do you need? That's that tone. Oh, what do you need? That's what we need to be able to learn to say to ourselves. Well, what do you need? Like today, I needed a break. I needed a treat. I needed to see the ocean, right? It's okay. It's not, I didn't take, didn't play hooky. It was purposeful, right? It's in the midst of all of the publishing and the writing and the posting and the being in the world. I needed to create a space where I needed to be alone at the ocean with an ice cream cone, right? That's my go-to, right? And so but I know myself. And so the whole quote of the book is, let us know ourselves and know our wounds so that we can apply the medicine, because if we don't know our disease, we won't take care of our weakness. So if I have a weakness towards insecurity and fear, I have to guard that. I have to know that. And so I give myself some alone time, build myself up, and then I face, whatever is coming next. But I'm the only person, and I talk about rescuing the orphan too, like taking care of the orphan. Like if we looked at ourselves as orphans in the world, we would be better able, as long as we have kindness, right, to live in the world, because we would take care of ourselves. But we see ourselves as, get yourself together, work it out, it'll be fine, do one more thing, when oftentimes what we need to do is take a break. So,
and even choosing to take that break, that's using our agency.
Yeah,
right? We can choose that for ourselves.
totally.
Elizabeth put up a question here, which I think is super important. And I have
I can't see the question, but
you can't see the question?
Let's see.
Q&A at the bottom.
No, maybe you can read it to me.
Hopefully everyone can see it. Well, the question is, what are some techniques writers can use to get past their fear and actually write the bleeping book?
I could believe in book. And that is just sheer.
Funny.
Yeah, I finally found the question. That's sheer discipline. Whatever it is, whatever it takes. I had some hiking friends, they held me accountable and they said, what chapter are you on? How many pages? And I tried to join a group that said, write this many pages a day. And that was a complete failure to me. So I can't, like, the fear is just, I think, when I was thinking about this, what are your dreams? What are your fears? What is your reality? And those are a couple of really good questions. Like if my dreams are to bring my coaching and my process to the world, then I'm going to face my fears. So before you face the fear, how you get through the fear of writing, maybe spend 10 minutes just free writing. What are your dreams? What are your dreams for this book? And that might give you the will to write.
That's a great answer. That's one with our 4-stage flourish process. The first stage is planting the seed, and we help people work through and understand what's their book vision, what are their publishing goals, and just in a very, like you said, free writing, describe what you imagine the book will be like when it's in your hands and what it will contain. Even before, not just jumping right into writing or even jumping into making that book outline, doing the other work first, really planting the seed and letting that begin to grow within us. I've often worked with people who have writer's block or writing anxiety. And we will I don't know that I don't have a technique, but I will talk it through with them. Often, what are the things, what are the fears? What are the things that are coming to mind that are keeping you from um, completing the goal or becoming a stronger writer, whatever it is that's the problem. Um, I tend not to believe in writer's block, but some people would disagree with me. I kind of look at it as sometimes I think sometimes we are truly not ready. Like we might have a great book idea, but our lives at the time, um, we're not ready, either psychologically, we haven't worked through it enough. We can do that when someone wants to write a memoir, right? Do they have enough distance from what they had to be able to reflect well and be able to really, be objective about the truth in the situation? So sometimes I think it is that we're just not really at that place. It doesn't mean it won't happen later, but we may need to do some work and have some things in our life rearranged to be able to be at the right place for that. And it's okay. You may have a great idea, but it might not be the time, but that's all right. That's why I have a red folder that says ideas on it. And when I have an idea, I just throw it in there. But I've captured it. Doesn't mean I have to write it right away.
Yeah.
And I also,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would always just keep writing, like write every day. For me, it's write every day. Yeah.
So we have Kenny. I'm working on a new book and was overwhelmed with how much has changed in my journey and how much material I was wrestling with. I was trying to get my ideas together before getting started, but my vision kept on evolving. Yeah. Now I'm working with Kimberly, yes, Kenny, you are, to guide me through the process, planting the seed, which is helping me to get further ahead and solidify my vision. It's a process, but I'm further ahead than I would be if I did nothing. Yeah, I think realizing that it's okay if we are working on a project, can be a book, can be something else, if our vision for it changes based on things that we now know that we didn't know before, or that we've come to realize that the original vision really needed to be adjusted, that's okay. Being intentional about it, being aware of it, when you're writing a book, having a very clear premise for your book, before you even start to write that first word is super important. I'm not someone who writes every day. And sometimes that does, kind of make me feel bad, but that's just not me. I write when I can write. But I do find when I sit down, once I'm into it, it's really, I think, the most joyful thing that I do, honestly, is my own creative writing. And then it's definitely in helping people publish their books. Thank you for speaking with us about your book. We have another poll. I think we've answered that one to the best of our ability. And if anyone else has a question, please put it up. We have enough time here for our third poll. And it's about coping with fear. Which methods for coping with fear most appeal to you? And there are some choices there. I think some of these choices relate directly with the suggestions that you provide in rejecting fear, learning to be led by love. They're kind of intertwined with some of those methods. I also included at the end some other coping method and choosing not to cope with fear.
Yeah. Absolutely.
To be honest,
that is very legitimate.
Yeah, there have been times in my life where I'm not facing that right now. I'm concentrating on something else. And, when I'm stronger, I'll go back to whatever that was. Maybe that's not the healthiest way.
It actually is, Kimberly, a very healthy thing. It's actually a healthy coping mechanism in certain cases. So if something happens at work and this huge fear comes up, what you do is you compartmentalize that. You actively choose to set it aside for a more appropriate time, right? The question is just don't get all the compartments full, right, of fear, so that you're, living out of that, right? But compartmentalizing actually is a very healthy coping mechanism.
end this. And 20% journaling to express emotions. I love to write, but for some reason I don't like to journal. I'm still working on what it means for me. I think it comes out in my fiction writing in other ways. Taking a spiritual path. Several people here answered practicing acceptance and meditation. Acceptance, learning to accept what I cannot change is a big thing for me and helping me cope. And turning to literature, story, or poetry. Yeah, so, right, I think having multiple ways to cope too is important. I mean, if it's not, in certain times in your life, you may lean more heavily on a certain way than others, and being open to giving other ways of coping a try. Journaling is not my favorite thing, but there have been times when I have tried it and have found something with it. I've actually leaned heavily on poetry in my past to help me process trauma and emotions. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't share the results yet. Okay, so here are the results. So now you can see what you guys answered. So at this point, we're going to have our giveaway, and we'll be not the one that I've marked up because, hey, this one's for me, and I'm going to go back and enjoy this again, the second read. But Avery has a book that she is going to be a copy of Rejecting Fear that she's going to be sending to a lucky winner. And we're going to do this through a simple question you can answer in the chat. And if you have the correct answer for both of these, then you could possibly win a copy of the book. And the question is, what were the first two items or the first item on polls, or first choice on polls 2 and 3? We just saw 3. And if you remember back to 2, if anyone would like to participate in that.
I think I already have a copy of the book. I wouldn't get the answer.
You would.
I would not.
Maybe the teacher in me having to do the little pop quiz at the end. Okay, well, if anyone can remember the first choice for poll 3 that we just took. No? It's something that Diane suggests, and we just talked about, that I'm not that great at. I have tried in the past.
We can start to give them. It starts with this letter, and
starts with J, people. And I think it's still on the screen. Lori, yes. That is wonderful. Lori, Avery will be contacting you to send you a copy of Diane's book. That's fantastic. Okay, folks. Well, we're getting right at 7 o'clock now. Thank you, Diane. Please, if you'd like, go to be a part of our group, grow the community around supporting and nurturing authors and publishing at Book Blossom Group on Facebook. And if you like, you can go to our website and subscribe to our forthcoming newsletter. If you know anyone who is very soon to publish a book, particularly coaches, speakers, trainers, consultants, and we'd really love to know about it and maybe help them spread the message about their book and their topic. So once again, on the chat, I think we still have the link here to purchase your copy of Diane's book. And I really want to thank you, Diane, for being part of our debut event. I got through it. I did not publicly humiliate myself, I don't think. So,
thank you so much for having me. It was fabulous. It was great to be with you guys.
Okay. And thank you to everybody who joined. And have a good evening.
Thank you all. Bye.